So I think most everyone is here that's coming in, and I'd like to call the meeting to order. This is of the Committee on Equal Opportunities. And well, welcome. First of all, glad to see everybody's healthy. There she is. I see her now. She's doing better. But we have some housekeeping things to take care of just because of our teleconferencing. Now, this meeting is being live streamed to YouTube for the general public. You can watch it on YouTube if you'd like. All audio and video is being captured and recorded, and in order to participate in the meeting, your video must be turned on. We must be able to see you. When you are not the active speaker, please ensure your microphone is muted so there isn't any background noise. Now, Don, I know Heather controls that for the general CPE. Who is controlling the muting most of the time?
That will be me today.
You will do that?
Yes.
Very good. If you need to speak, please raise your hand so I can call on you before you unmute. Now, I just got to a different screen here. I only see Don at the minute.
Yes, but, I'm sharing the screen at the moment.
I have no issues or problems. If I don't see your hand, if you want to speak up and unmute and speak up, that's fine with me. We'll do the best we can to get through this.
This is Love. I just wanted to let you all know that my camera does not work on.
I'm sorry, Letitia. Love you. Gee, miss seeing your pretty face too. But
so do I still get to vote or participate on the minutes, or how does that work?
Well, actually, we have to see your face for you to be on the minutes, but you're welcome to join in just as in a conference call.
What is our Don? What is our who all's here? We need to do. We have quorum. Can we let's check that out first?
Okay, that's where I'm headed, Travis. And with that, if Don can call the roll, that would be great. Don?
Yes.
Call the roll.
So if you could say what I can do now, I know that at the moment, let me stop sharing my screen so I can see certain individuals here. And so we have Dr. Stat.
Here. Aye.
Whitney Allen.
Here. Aye.
Deborah Aparicio.
I'm here.
David Carpenter.
I'm here.
Robert Croft.
I am here.
Alfonso de Torres Nunez.
Here.
Kim Hallbauer. Grant Minix.
Here.
Ling Yu Patty. She just sent a message saying she's trying to get on, so I'll give her a few minutes. Sean Reynolds. Letitia Robertson.
Here.
Anyone I missed?
Sorry about that. This is Sean Reynolds.
Oh, this is Sean Reynolds. Excellent.
All right.
And so
thank you, Don. Moving right on. I haven't heard from President Thompson. Is he present? And if he is, would he like to make a comment or two?
I know that he was coming from another meeting, so we may have to pause when he gets on.
Okay, that we can do. Now, Jessica, about an hour ago, posted the minutes from our last two meetings. I've had a chance to read them. I don't know if everyone else has read them or not, but we need approval of the minutes from the October meeting as well as the January 27th meeting. We'll take the October meeting. Are there any changes, additions, or corrections to be made?
I make a motion to pass the minutes.
Okay,
Second,
thank you, David. And it was seconded by,
Sean.
okay. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, the January 27th minutes. I read through it and I do have a question because in the section on approval of minutes, it said something about a December 12th meeting. That we couldn't approve the minutes from the December 12th because we did not have a quorum. I didn't think we had a meeting on, or what is, can you clarify that?
The December 12th meeting was the call meeting that we had on the phone that discussed the upcoming CEO report information evaluation. So it was a call meeting that we had to have.
Okay, but we did not see any minutes from that posted by Jessica. So the only ones that we can approve right now will be the January 27th minutes.
Correct.
Any other clarifications or comments on that? All in favor, please say aye. I'm
Aye.
sorry, I need a motion. I'm sorry.
Said motion.
And a second.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, thank you. Now, at this point, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Travis so he can go over the, give us a brief overview of the diversity plan evaluation process. Most of us have been involved in the scoring and that sort of thing, but Travis, if you want to fill us in a little bit more, go right ahead. The floor is yours.
I would be happy to do that, but I see that Dr. Thompson is on. If you want to allow him to make a suggestion that maybe he give a few words before we get into the meat of the meeting.
That would be fine. Welcome, Aaron.
You muted.
Aaron.
you
He'll
go.
figure it out.
Hello, Dr. Stad. How are you?
I'm doing well, sir. And you joined us just in time. Do you have a few comments to make to the CEO?
I do indeed. I want to, first of all, say thanks to everybody for the work you're doing. There's a lot of stuff that's going on in the state now. As you well know, we are in what I would consider to be an interesting normal. It's the abnormal normal now. We hope to somewhere get to a normal again, but whatever that normal is, it will not look like the normal we had before. So we know this, and we know it clearly. We'll be looking at that, constantly trying to identify and try to put in place as fast as we can, but we just don't know when that will be. I have a meeting with the presidents on Wednesday with some of these conversations that we're talking about with them. We'll be sharing with you all and others as soon as we get some idea about what the fall is going to look like. We're getting a little bit better picture of what the summer may look like, which will be a lot like the way it looks now. So I'll be getting back in contact with everybody. I'm sure Travis and Dawn will fill you in on what some of the conversations are if your presidents don't already do it. You know, it's been a while since I've been to a CEO meeting, so it's good to be here with you virtually, if not truly in a place where we could have communion, but we'll do it this way. As a matter of fact, I've gotten it down pretty good, I think. You know, except for getting a virtual background that I'm not hidden in, you know, I've done pretty good with this stuff. You know, we have been clearly recognized nationally as having one of the more comprehensive ways of looking at equity, inclusion, diversity, as well as what we're doing to have a proactive effect on gap closing. And so much of what you all do and what this process is that's going on now and the CEO as a whole is clearly indicative of exactly the kind of proactive things that we're doing. We're seeing some significant movement in gap closing around degrees and credentials. If you haven't seen our progress report yet, I hope you do, but just to give you a hint of some of the things that are in it, our minority degrees actually increased by 7.3%, minority degrees and credentials at KCTCS. And, this is compared to our overall increase at KCTCS of about 4.8%. So Kentucky, for us to reach the 60% attainment mark by 2030, we had to grow about 1.7% to make that happen. And so far, we're above that trajectory. The issue is what's going to happen now, right? So we know that will have a big effect. The other thing too, we've grown in light of 12 years of budget cuts. We thought we were going to get money this time, and it looked really good until COVID-19 came around, and then we ended up with flat funding. We don't know what funding will look like next year, but we know that we hope that at the minimum it'll be flat funding, but we don't know. And they did a one-year budget, so we'll have a better idea. Our public universities grew with underrepresented minority degrees by 5.5%. And if you compare with, they didn't really have any growth overall, that means our public universities are doing a really good job of focusing on those that have historically been the most disenfranchised. We still have a ways to go on our low income. We really have a ways to go on all of our degrees, period. But on our low income, we need to step it up a little more. So I really want to celebrate while we have a chance to celebrate. It may not look this way next year, is to say I appreciate all the campuses for what they've done and, in fact, what you're doing. One of the pieces that, and I hope, Dr. Stat, I have a chance to answer any questions that people may have, but one of the pieces that I want to be clear about is that although we can't show a direct causality between what you guys are doing and what we've done with our overall diversity and inclusion plans, what we know is there's a strong correlation. And that, along with our performance funding, my argument is two of the things that other states aren't doing that focuses on our degree attainment, especially around low income and underrepresented. Those two items, I would argue, if we did enough path analysis, we would see a direct causality. But we don't need to do that to see a high correlation. So we are, once again, are doing things in light of budget cuts that have been able to produce some of the things that will be good for the overall economy of the state. So the item that I would really, as you're going over these diversity and inclusion plans, is to think about how well are these correlated with the kind of outputs that we're seeing. And one of the pieces that I hope that all of the readers who are doing these readings of the plans will have that in mind, that the overall goal of Kentucky cannot be achieved without us having a direct focus on the populations that we purport we're serving with the CPE and especially with the CEO. So Dr. Stat, there's a whole lot more I can share with you that's going on. Hopefully you guys have had a chance to see the return on investment report, where it shows that higher education not only matters, it matters a whole lot in all kinds of outcomes. And if you look at even what's going on with the disproportionate amount of folk who are dying or gravely ill or even overall ill from COVID-19, you can see the effect of what disenfranchisement has meant in Kentucky as well as the nation. So what we're trying to do here truly is to flatten the curve, if I can use that term too loosely. If we don't do what we're doing, the route and the way we're doing it, then I don't think we'll get to a point whereby if another pandemic springs up, that we won't still see this disproportionate amount even 100 years from now. So please know what you're doing is extremely important. And with that, Dr. Stat, I'm happy to take any questions that you may have of me.
And the floor is open for anyone with questions for Aaron.
We have one from Alfonso de Torres Nunez.
Dr. Thompson, you are absolutely right. And I want to reflect a little bit on what you say, because every word that we say, every thought that we share through the reports and through the evaluations can drive the institution that we are providing feedback to a whole lot of meaningful and effective change. And I just want to share with the board an example of that. In our last visit to JCTC, the people that were present over there, we were paying attention to the presentations that they were doing for us. And I remember that there was one specific lady who was talking about the diversity student center or something similar. And we provided some specific feedback as to how, in order to reach out to more people, they could perhaps change or translate the language into the message into another languages. Said and done. I don't know if Ms. Offwood, I don't know if they reach out to you, but they reach out to me like a month later after that, and they shared with me all those changes that they did. They shared with me as well that they found a really good reception on that little change that we suggested in that meeting. And they shared with me some, not numbers, but like they definitely shared that they saw an increase of people coming to that diversity center. So I want to piggyback on what Dr. Thompson said and reflect and remind everybody probably that what we do, what we say has a lot of weight on the institutions that we are providing feedback for, not just to close the gap, but also to reach out to more people, you know. So that's just one good news to share with the board about the work that we do, that it actually shows that is doing something, that is impacting in some way or level.
You know, one of the things that I talked with Travis and Dawn about this morning, we really need to be personalizing, if you want to call it that, some of the great things that we're doing, or some of these direct proactive impacts that we're trying to have with some of these stories. So Alfonso, I really appreciate what you just said. And my hope is that we can, and Dawn will be reaching out to people. And we do obviously need to be more culturally aware of the populations that we want to be a part of this conversation. And I heard that too. So I appreciate it.
Actually, the process that we're about to start again on the going over these diversity reports, what have you, I feel that the steps that, well, you gave several positive steps, Aaron, and I think it's just a lot to do with what you have come up with, or you, Travis, and the group came up with for this diversity plan, because I think the schools are buying into it, and it's starting to show. Now, you say maybe we won't show quite as good of results coming up. I think we will, just because the schools are taking it seriously.
Any other questions for me before I get off and conquer another world?
You found somebody that's got money?
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Travis. That's the only person I know. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I appreciate it, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'll be working with Travis, Dawn, Jessica, and Devin. We want to get some stories out. We want to get some items out there that would allow people truly to connect with these things that you folks are doing. So I appreciate it once again, and I hope you all have a great meeting.
Well, we've got lots of reports to go over.
Yeah, I bet.
It should be a good meeting. Some very positive things, I think.
Thank you, Chair Staff, for all you do too, by the way. I will tell you folks, I gave Bob, and other folk gave Bob a compliment in the council meeting. From everything I've heard and what I've seen, this committee is running as smooth and as complete. I'll say it that way, as I've seen. And it's great actually having one of your former chairs on the, is he still here? Is Sean still on the committee? Hey, Sean, I just saw you. Hi. You know, so, you know, you all have the benefit of having two people that's been engaged in this for a long time from a council perspective. So Bob, I appreciate your leadership. Sean, I appreciated yours, and good to have you both as friends and council members. So thank you guys. Have a good one.
Thank you. Thank you, Aaron. Appreciate that. All right. Travis, are you ready to give us some background?
Yeah, sure. Be glad to.
The floor is yours.
Now, Dawn, are you navigating the slides? Okay. We're just going to do a quick overview of the scoring process. And we got a lot of reports to go through, so I'll go through this quickly. I know, obviously, the ones that are on the Zoom call right now all know the process very well, but in case some folks are out there watching that aren't familiar, we want to give some context around what's going to be presented today. But the one thing I do want to take just a little bit of time for is just to thank everybody so much for all the hard work that they did on this, both the review teams and the campuses. This is not a simple check the box process. This is a very substantive, in-depth process, which requires a lot of time and effort on the submission and the review side. And I'm really proud of everything that's been done. And I just want to thank you all, particularly our volunteers in the review teams, for their time on this. This is it's a lot of work, but I think it's valuable work. And and as Dr. Thompson mentioned earlier, there is a very large return on investment for what you're doing. So thank you so much for the time that you spend. We really appreciate it. And it's really where we get the value out of this process. So, and it would not work at all without these review teams. So thank you so much for that. So go ahead, Dawn. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is the annual report from 2019. It is broken down into two sections. There's a rubric that outlines how these reports are going to be evaluated. They're equally set off towards, I guess you want to say, on a quantitative and a qualitative side, except for KCTCS institutions that have less points because they don't have any graduate school enrollment. But it's equally weighted on quantitative and qualitative elements, I guess the word I'm looking for. And there's a minimum score for eligibility to offer new programs. It's just 24 for universities and 22 for KCTCS. And next slide will show you a little bit more about how that's broken down. So the evaluation of progress towards targets are set in the following areas: undergraduate and graduate enrollment. I'll talk a little bit more of that in a minute. First and second year retention for both underrepresented minority and low income students. Graduate for 6-year and 3-year graduation rates for the 2-year institutions for underrepresented minority and low income students. Degrees conferred or credentials awarded for underrepresented minority and low income students. And we also look at workforce diversity and a number of underrepresented minority faculty and staff members as well. And and institutions have targets set in those areas.
Travis,
yes.
Could you define or tell everyone how you calculate low income, or who qualifies as low income?
Yeah, sure. The standard we use generally when we talk about low income is Pell eligible students. So any students that are eligible for any amount of Pell award, we consider to be low income. So whether you hear us talk about that here in this setting or in the larger council meetings, when we talk about progress for low income students, it's always that Pell eligibility is the criteria that we use. Thanks, Dr. Stad. That's a good point. There are 9 areas that we look at for universities and 8 areas for KCTCS institutions in our scoring. Again, I mentioned earlier, we look at graduate enrollment, which obviously our KCTCS institutions don't have. And the way that we score those on the quantitative side is you receive a 2 if your annual target is met or exceeded. You receive a score of a 1 if your annual target is not met, but the value is greater than your 2015-16 baseline. So we usually look at a linear trajectory towards those 2021 goals. And if you're at or over the line, you get a 2. If you're below the line but below the baseline, then you get a 1. And if you're less than your baseline for your annual results, then you receive a 0 for that area. There's a maximum of 18 points that can be scored for universities and a maximum of 16 points for KCTCS institutions. We look at diversity in a holistic manner. Diversity, we have a very broad definition of diversity that you can see there on your screen. That's from our diversity policy. And we look at goals set for underrepresented minorities, percentage of underrepresented minority students, percentage of African American students, and percentage of Hispanic students. And again, overall URM, there are goals set for each of those categories. We look at those as well as an enrollment narrative that institutions provide to talk about other types of diversity on our campus. So as you see, our definition of diversity is very broad and not just focused on racial and ethnic diversity. And so but we can't count those numbers as well from a data perspective. So we just ask institutions to tell us a little bit about the other types of diversity on their campus. So you have different religious groups that meet on your campus, different political affiliation groups that meet on your campus, folks perhaps from different areas of the world or areas of the country or even areas of the state for that matter. Again, the definition of diversity is very broad, and while we can't as easily count the numbers for some of these other groups, we can still talk about them because we know they're on our campus as well. When we talk about diversity, we want to make sure that folks know that we're inclusive of other types as well, even though we are setting goals for racial and ethnic minorities. So we have annual targets. Again, this is a little bit following from the last slide. Annual targets are set in the areas that I mentioned, and a narrative is provided. And then the last piece I'll mention is that we sort of do this on a pass-fail basis. So we look at all the elements considered, progress, and all towards all the goals set in the instances outlined above. Look at the narrative and provide a score for both graduate and undergraduate diversity as a 2 or a 0. We do this because not only do we care about other types of diversity, but we're very careful not to create quotas for any racial and ethnic minority groups. Quotas are illegal per the U.S. Constitution and equal protection. So we make sure that we don't set quotas and don't want to do anything that could be perceived that we are setting any kind of quotas. It's not good for a lot of reasons, but just not only from a constitutional perspective, but for a perception perspective as well. In no instances do we want our underrepresented minority students to feel like, for anybody there to feel like they're just filling a number or meeting a need for that perspective, because we know that's simply not true. So we look at this in a holistic way rather than a hard or fast number as we do with some of the others, again, to avoid some constitutional issues, but also to make sure that the perception that those students are there because they deserve to be there and not just to meet a number. So in the qualitative piece of the evaluation, there are 3 focus areas: opportunity, success, and impact. They match up with our areas outlined in our strategic agenda. And each institution's plan that's based off of our policy identifies strategies designed to meet goals set forth in each of these focus areas. For each focus area, reports are evaluated on the following criteria. So we look at 3 elements. First, we look at implementation of strategies with Fidelity. So did you implement the strategies that you told us you were going to implement in your plan with Fidelity? Did you actually follow through with what you said you were going to do? The second part is, and the third part are really this continuous improvement model that we find so important in this policy. And that's number 1 is analyzing the strategy effectiveness. So you implemented this strategy, hopefully with Fidelity, did it work? Analyze whether or not it worked. This could be from hard data to know whether students are retained, for example, if it's a retention strategy, or just from anecdotes or surveys, for example, from students that are interviewed that have participated in some of the strategies to help meet the goals. Then after we look at the analysis of the strategy effectiveness, we look at that analysis and ask institutions to tell us what lessons they've learned and what next steps they're going to take based on the analysis. So you analyze this strategy, it's very effective. Maybe it was a pilot and we're gonna expand it out because it was so good, or and implement it on a wider basis moving forward, or maybe it didn't work as well, and maybe there's some things we're gonna tweak, or maybe the strategy was discontinued because it's not working anymore. Just again, really promoting the thoughtfulness of strategy implementation on our campuses. So we'll evaluate each one of those for each of the 3 focus areas. Then they're scored in the following manner. If 2 meets or exceeds expectations in each of these areas, 1, you make progress towards meeting the expectations, or 0, you don't meet any of the expectations. There's a maximum of 18 points. So there's 3 policy areas, and in each policy area, there's 3 evaluation areas: the implementation, analysis, and lessons learned. And then you get a maximum of 2 points in each category. And we have a detailed rubric that our review teams look at to determine whether a 2, 1, or 0 should be awarded.
All right. Is that? Do you have another slide?
No.
Well, that's the last slide, I think, for this. Again, thanks so much again for your hard work on this. If anybody, we went through this pretty quickly. If there's anybody out there that's watching this online that has more questions, feel free to email me or Dawn, and we'll be happy to answer questions. My email address is my name, travis.powell, Powell, @ky.gov, and be happy to answer any more questions you have about the evaluation process.
All right. Thank you, Travis.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, we'll start our diversity plan review, the team reports. I'll turn this over to Dawn, who will facilitate the discussions with we have different team leaders for all the groups. I see the first one up is Stephanie Mayberry, and I was part of this group, so but I'll give it to Dawn and let her do some introductions.
Prior to that, Dr. Stat, I saw that Alfonso de Torres Nunez had his hand raised. I'll give him a moment to see if he has a question he wants to ask Travis Powell.
Hi, Mr. Powell. So
Hey.
It's not more of a question, but it's kind of like a reflection in the light of the diversity plans that I have been able to review with my team. And this is something that I'm sure that Bruce, my team leader, might have caught within my reflections, but and this is just from the 4, okay? So I don't know if I don't want to generalize, but my concern is with the definition of diversity. And I'm saying this because in the 4 plans that I have reviewed, I have found a trend that diversity is approached from X, Y, Z, but it is consistent that the perspective of language is something that is not approached at all. And I'm saying this because it really caught my eye that as an example such as Owensboro Community College was actually doing something about it, whereas the others, they weren't doing that much. So I just wanted to bring to the entire group that concern, because I don't know if you all might have seen it through the other reviews, but at least from the ones that were assigned to our team, I have seen that consistency in the sense of diversity approach from maybe race, maybe gender, and maybe socioeconomics, but the matter of language, never there. And I don't know what the entire group feels about it. I don't know if maybe this is something that doesn't need to be brought up, but I mean, I just wanted to say that because maybe in the future, or maybe for this year, I don't know. And maybe something such as that could be brought up too, because language is diversity too.
Let me just say this for purposes of you will definitely see it more heavily skewed towards racial and ethnic minorities and low income students, because those are the ones that we're looking at for the student success metrics. So if you're talking about, increasing graduation rates, retention, that sort of thing, you're going to see more, because the targets are set in those areas in the success section. So that's the success section is almost solely focused on the student success of those URM and low income students. But in the other areas, most certainly, I mean, we need to be looking at those other types of diversity as well. We had in the last version of the policy before we did our revisions, we had a laundry list of different types of diversity. And quite frankly, it got so long that we decided to just go with the not list. It was including but not limited to. We decided not to list, because the more you put in there, the more someone can argue you left somebody out on purpose. And we didn't want that to happen. But I do think we could probably put some guidance about the different types of things that we're thinking about in that area without maybe having them listed one by one in the definition. So I just wanted to give you that extra context. I totally agree. It's something we need to be looking at, but you're definitely going to see it more skewed towards low income and URM students in the success section, because that's the groups we're looking at there.
Okay, I'm just saying because, as I said before, I have seen some of the things transparent from the diversity plan in Owensboro, and I'm also thinking about what we heard from Western Kentucky University when they came to the meeting in person in JCDC. I don't know. I mean, it's just that if they have, I don't want to say if they have the resources, but I'm afraid that they may be leaving untapped potential for reaching out even more than what they do. And that's something that I would probably try to tap into whenever those evaluations are shared with them. Because
thank you, Alfonso, for that thought. And I can't remember which one of the 4 schools I had, but one of them did come up with a ESL as a strategy. So
yeah, let's talk offline. Alfonso, you and Dawn and I can talk, and maybe we can pull something together for the next meeting to talk a little about like this before, like we did with the international students before. So let's see what we can do there. This is good discussion.
Okay. Go ahead, Dawn. We have Stephanie Mayberry with the team 1.
Yes,
would you like to say things, or how do you want to start this off, Dawn?
We're going to go ahead and get started with our individual team reports, and each team has a team lead, and you'll see a slide that has the upcoming reports for those institutions. And when you as a team lead see your slide, then you can go to that next portion of the report. If any other review team members might have something they want to comment on, particularly from the CEO, at the time your group comes up, then once the team lead is finished reviewing your reports, please feel free to jump in there. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie Mayberry.
Good afternoon. Our team consisted of me, Whitney Allen, and Dr. Stat. We evaluated Hazard, Madisonville, Somerset, and Kentucky State University. This was the first attempt for both Whitney and I. Dr. Stat has done this in the past, but if the institutions need more information about some of the scores we've given and the feedback provided, maybe brief, if they want more information, they're open to contact us, and we're open to meeting with them to talk about how we came to these scores. For Hazard Community College, the quantitative scores, out of the 16 points possible, because they were a community college, they scored 11 out of 16. And for the the qualitative portion, which is the portion that we scored, we had, I'm gonna move this around on my screen, sorry. The opportunity, success and impact for the implementation with Fidelity, scores across the board of 2. Effectiveness, 1, 2, 2, and lessons learned 2. So overall the score was 17 out of 18 for Hazard Community College on the qualitative portion.
And Stephanie, let me just put in as one of the reviewers, with all of them that the 4 that we had, they all showed significant improvement over last year's. The experience from last year and the feedback they got, it really was remarkable how much many of them improved in their presentations.
Correct. So overall, we felt that the Hazard Community College plan was ambitious and attainable. We did ask for more clarity on the admissions process barrier removal, just more specific information about what that looks like, what populations are being targeted, and what particular strategies were investigated and chosen in that process. We also wanted to talk about how that applies as far as the barriers, because the community college is an open admissions institution. So we really wanted to see what were those admissions barriers beyond the academic pieces and how we were able to move past that in this particular plan. And then also looking at the overall student matriculation into the institution from those student populations considered to have barriers. Also, our final recommendation was that in a couple of the areas, there were multiple strategies, and we felt that some of those strategies could be combined so that there weren't 9 different strategies, that there could be 3 to 5 strategies instead of 9, because a lot of them were very similar and redundant. For Madisonville Community College, on the quantitative portion, they earned 13 out of 16 on the scores, and 15 out of 18 on their qualitative portion for us. And some of the feedback that we provided, that there are many programs offered, but it's not clearly distinguished which programs are new initiatives. One of the recommendations that Dr. Stadt had is just in the language used for the strategies. That's what we're evaluating on. So just make sure that when offering initiatives, there are a lot of initiatives, but which ones are distinctly new, and making sure that you're making the case for that. We also wanted to get more information about overall numbers for the institution, so that we could get a clearer picture of the impact of the initiatives. And we gave an example of what we meant by that. And for Somerset, they earned 10 out of 16 on the quantitative portion, and 12 out of 18 on the qualitative section that we scored. We were very impressed by some of the institution's ESL efforts, as well as their work with the Diversity Advisory Board, but we were looking for more tangible evidence-based promotion of the minority-focused scholarships, and just looking for more details in numbers similar to what we just suggested with Madisonville. And then finally, we had Kentucky State University. The quantitative scores were 11 out of 18 on that portion, and 13 out of 18 on the qualitative portion that we scored. And overall, we felt like there were some challenges the institution faced due to vacancies and restructuring. But we did note that they were continuing to make progress despite those obstacles, and making room for improvement. We are still, again, asking our institutions just to provide raw numbers as well as percentages in the analysis so that we can see the impact of the strategies given.
Let me just say on the Kentucky State material, I believe they were the lowest of the group in last year's evaluation, and they had just tremendous numbers of strategies. They combined those effectively, and the writing and the efforts was greatly improved. So congratulations to Kentucky State.
Overall, we feel that they were good plans, and we were very impressed with some of the work being done.
At this time, if there are any comments or any other questions from the rest of the CEO members, we will see if we can entertain those now. I'll look to see if there's anything in the chat. Anyone have any questions? I don't see any hands raised.
Hey, Dawn, this is Melissa. Remind us again what the score needed. What's the score that you need to get to be eligible to offer programs?
For four-year universities, it is 24 out of 36. And for KCTCS institutions, it is 22 out of 34.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Hearing none, we'll move on to our, get my screen to not be frozen. There we go. We'll move on to team 2. And the team lead for team 2 was Lisa Shimwell. Lisa?
Good afternoon, and I want to first recognize my 2 team members were Deborah and Lavtesha, and I had worked with Lavtesha previously, and it was the first time that Deborah and I had met, and so it was a very delightful group and very productive, and I want to thank them for their hard work before I start. And I'll dive right in. I did approach mine a little differently, not having seen the slide deck. So it looks like Ashland Community College is first. And I'll start talking as you look at the scores there. But what we did, the way I approached it was according to the rubric. We looked at the implementation area first. They did really, really well in this area. They had some great ideas, the strategies, we thought the strategies were good. We did make a couple of comments on individual strategies, which probably won't show up on these. I'm assuming they probably get that information, but one of the examples was they had a luncheon presentation as strategy number 2, and we felt like it was a first time event, and one of the things that we noted for it to be a first time, we thought it was well thought out, so we wanted to be sure that we gave some kudos out for that. It was very, very well thought out, and I don't think they have as much work to do when they go back and try to do the event again, so we wanted to mention that. In the area of effectiveness for the rubric, they did very well. We had the impact and opportunity areas were done really, really well with their effective descriptions, as well with the analysis in each of the areas. One of the things that we did notice is that they might want to consider taking each of the outcomes and make sure they're correlating each outcome to the effectiveness, especially with student success. But overall, we felt that the analysis was effective and that the quality of work was very evident, especially with opportunity and impact in the area of analysis. And we did make a couple of specific comments with a couple of the strategies. Some of the data on one of the strategies seemed to be more anecdotal, which doesn't mean that that's bad. It was really heavy on that. And we thought it was a worthwhile events that they had, but maybe with some more quantitative data, they may be able to draw on some stronger conclusions. And then we also suggested that anything that they had a survey on, that they might want to be sure they're reviewing their questions to ensure they're leading to what their intended goals are. So there was a couple of those comments. We noticed that in lessons learned, especially in the student success area, they tended to score a point lower in their analysis because we believe that they probably got a little more work to do, and that probably has to do with correlating the outcomes. Once they strengthen that, then they're probably going to be able to draw some stronger conclusions. And it just made for a little less depth in reporting, but overall, we thought it was a good report, and we were impressed. And I will say that although I don't remember, I participated in this as a group member, and Lavtesha was our lead last year. But one of the things that Lavtesha is starfish, and we just told them that they might, want to look at how they're using that, making sure that they're getting the full use of it. I think we had that same thing, suggestion for another school, because some of us that had been in student success before were familiar with that platform, and thought we just couldn't tell from the report, are they really getting the full use from it? And just a few suggestions like that throughout, but overall we were impressed with Ashland, and we thought they did an overall nice job. And then Henderson was one of the, I guess you could say, stars of our group. We didn't really have any problems with their implementation. We thought they did really good descriptions. The effectiveness area, we had maybe some minor suggestions, like just looking at, like there was a strategy under impact that when they did the effectiveness write-up, that they might want to look at. They had made the comment, well, we're a transient college and we really don't have a lot of student organization opportunities, and we just really encourage them there to make sure they're doing multiple survey instruments, because yes, a community college is going to be heavy on commuter students, but just from some of our backgrounds being on campus, we talked a little bit about the fact that there are still things, and especially as we go forward in this new, I think they're calling it abnormal instead of new normal, but there are still some things that we could probably do to help those students, because now that we're making more use of Zoom, there may be more opportunities for social engagement through Zoom and student life opportunities through Zoom, as we've seen with what some of the schools have done and been able to explore. So that was just a suggestion there, rather than just saying, well, we're a transient college and it's difficult. So we really encourage them to look at a lot of different surveys, but I think what they're doing thus far seems to be working. Same thing with lessons learned. We just had one minor little hiccup with one of the strategies, is that this one was another one with starfish, making sure you're really using the full range of starfish. And they may very well be doing that. And I can't remember if this school this was their first year with starfish. And it could also be the person that's over this area. Do they really know the full range of it? So we did want to call their attention to that. The other thing that we noted on this group with Henderson is that and we noticed this some with a lot, especially with like the cultural diversity officer or the chief equity officer. This one mentioned the early alert manager, and they mentioned the hirings of these people, or in the future, this will be their responsibility. And we just want to make sure that all schools realize that you can't just leave it to obviously the one person. We want to make sure that they're working across campus to get buy-in, because just to say the early alert manager is going to be responsible for building the commitment to student success between the faculty and staff, we're going to need some really well laid out plans there. But overall, that was just a comment that we had, but overall we were very happy with that one. Once again, with the next school, who do you have up now? Oh, you've got Northern. Let me scroll down here. I thought they'd be in alphabetical order. So, okay, so Northern, this is the one. I don't know if we have any representatives on here from Northern, but this was the one that really excited me. And I think our group felt really good about this one too. But it really excited me because I've done work on both the student life side and the academic affairs side. And we were very impressed with Northern. And Latesha and I think we had Northern last year, and we may be wrong about that, but we felt like if we messed up on that, we still, if whatever school we were judging them on, we were thinking, wow, they've really improved. But they did a phenomenal job. And one of the things that I would say is they seem to really understand that when you're talking about diversity, and I think this was something that maybe Alonso alluded to earlier, you're talking about just a little bit more than an ethnic group, but they looked at the underrepresented minority in terms of low income, the underserved population, socioeconomic background, as well as their ethnic groups. So we were really impressed with that because they had a wide range of implementation strategies. Their effectiveness, they were very, very thorough in their write-up on this, and it really showed, especially with like their student success, because they really kind of went to the next level with making sure that they were showing they had engagement and they were getting participation across student life. And we really appreciated the details in those areas. And lessons learned, this one is the one where I just touched upon this in my group, but I want to say this about this strategy. This group, the Northern, is the one that had the student success by design or success by design. And we all thought that was excellent. But having just the background that I've had in student success, I was so impressed with the Equity Academy. And I don't know what other schools are doing in that area, but they held this over a few days. They developed work teams. Their work teams developed action plans. And on paper, it looked like they really were getting some buy-in, and they submitted this to their president because they wanted to try to get buy-in all across campus. So regardless of whether they've done that at Northern, they certainly are trying, and we were so impressed with the efforts that they made. And one of the things that I would say to Dawn and the committee and Travis, if you look at this and you look at what they're doing, and it really is, if that Equity Academy and success by design is really as it's reflected on paper, that may be a really good model going forward of something schools could do throughout the regions. It may not work for everyone, but one of the things that I would really encourage the Northern people to do is to really consider maybe presenting that at a conference if they feel like that's worthwhile. I just thought that was really interesting and intriguing, the way they went about trying to get buy-in. And that's what I think we miss a lot of times with the both diversity and student success. And so just kudos went out to them on that. We were just, we really enjoyed reading that. And then the last school is South Central. And South Central, basically with implementation, we felt like we read this, the way we looked at this, did you do what you said you were going to do? And we felt like overall they had some excellent explanations in this area. Their effectiveness, we felt like it met or exceeded what what the rubric had asked them to do. We do think that maybe they want to look at their mentoring process. And this is just kind of a critical suggestion. It wasn't there was anything wrong with it, but next year or the year after, I would really like to see, and our group talked about how we'd really like to see how often did they meet in their mentoring process with this mentoring, what type of training did the mentors receive, how were they paired with the students, what type of questions were on this exit survey, to really drill down on that, because they may be onto something there. I don't know, but that, we all know that a lot of our schools are doing some form of mentoring and peer advisory groups. But because they got some good results there, we thought that there might be something there we want to look at if we could drill down more. And their lessons learned, they were very thoughtful and thorough in their process. It helped them to draw some really good conclusions. We felt like that one of the things that we would encourage all groups, but especially this one, make sure they know that it's okay to say in the lessons learned, this went poorly. And this is what we learned, because we learned a lot of things of what they did well. And we didn't deduct from the scores on this, but we would really, really like to see some critical analysis on here's what went wrong. And it just, it was just, it was a mess, or it was just a little bit wrong. And here's how we plan to correct that next year. Because we know if you really, really analyze, or maybe even tell us, although this worked well, we're going to change it up next year. I think that would be really interesting in the lessons learned, to kind of know how they feel about it rather than just the good. But overall, like I said, we were very impressed. And like I said, Northern just really stood out, probably because of that Equity Academy and that Success by Design, and just the whole way they went about trying to get buy-in. But we were impressed, and it was, I just once again want to reiterate, I really appreciate my work team and the input, and we had a great time getting to know each other and talked about a lot of different things with it. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions for this team?
And this is Love. I'd like to add a comment to what Lisa had added. So one of the main commonalities that we did identify between the universities and the colleges that we reviewed this year is that several of them mentioned that it was difficult for them to quantify the number of students they recruited when they hosted their outreach and recruitment events. And so our team wanted to share with the other universities and colleges that it may be wise for them to revise their outreach and engagement strategies for each of their target populations versus having a one-size-fits-all based off of their diversity plan. And then we also found that the colleges and universities had a difficult time correlating their survey results to student success. So we would like to highly recommend that the colleges and universities reassess their surveys or their evaluation questions and align them to measurable outcomes that will allow them to provide a more accurate analysis of the impact and or effectiveness each strategy will have on student success.
And I would say to that, we talked a little bit about this, and this is something the committee can talk about at a later time, but I think all the schools having that conversation, but also making sure that everybody in their organization, and I know this is not easy from having done student success, but what is student success? And everybody be on the same page about that so that the outcomes they're working toward are all across the board, across campus. And that's why I think maybe this thing with Northern, they may be onto something there by having done those work teams.
Thank you. Thank you, Team 2. And Team 3 is up next, and their team lead is Melissa Young.
Hello. So my team was myself and Sean Reynolds and David Carpenter. And we looked at 2 community colleges, West Kentucky Community College and Maysville Community College, as well as U of L and EK. So I guess we'll start with West Kentucky Community and Technical College. Let's see. It looks like on the quantitative side, they scored 14 out of 16, and on the qualitative scores, 9 out of 18. And that gave them a 22 out of 34, which I believe is eligible to offer new programs.
Yes, it is.
And I think some of the comments we captured here, and this is sort of a global comment, I think. There's a lot of different recruitment events, a lot of outreach to high schools. A lot of these are your typical kind of college fairs where people come by. I think it's difficult to track, your yield on those types of events. I think, though, it would be very helpful as much as you can to try to capture people's names or contact information, or, have some way to track this so you can look at not just how many people attend different recruitment events, but really, how many of those people go on to enroll, which is, I think, the real hallmark of a successful outreach and recruitment process. So let's see, we also said that you need to track outcomes for participants versus non-participants in success strategies, and consider some climate surveys to faculty at various points, not just at the exit, which I think is great that they do exit interviews and surveys with all of the faculty, but there might be ways to check in with faculty all through the process. I think overall we felt like there were a lot of activities going on and described, but maybe the implementation of those could be a little more coordinated or systematic, or at least described in such a way that it appears to be coordinated and systematic. And I think just, thinking about the full range of diversity and equity and inclusion, LGBTQ students, adult students, veterans, just the whole range of students. I think not just West Kentucky, but a lot of the campuses really need to really kind of put a broader, ESL students, just the whole range of students, and think about how to serve them better and more effectively. So I guess next school, we had University of Louisville. On the quantitative side, they were 11 out of 18. On the qualitative side, 17 out of 18. We really did not have, very many criticisms of this proposal on the qualitative side. They only lost 1 point there for effectiveness. I thought it was a really good proposal. It was well written. Again, same comment about just trying to capture a little bit more of the yield on recruitment, because attendance is a good indicator, but as we say, attendance may be down 1 year, but maybe 70% of the people who attended end up enrolling. So that's not necessarily a bad event. So I think that there was a lot of good reflection at UOD lessons learned. I think that they had some really good insights. I think we said about summer bridge programs, and it seemed like they were, to take Lisa's point, they weren't afraid to really challenge themselves and to really look at maybe what could have gone better and to describe that. And I think that that's what we're looking for, is a really good evidence of reflection and refinement. Okay, I guess next slide. For Maysville Community College, they were 11 out of 16 on the quantitative side, and they were 14 out of 18 on the qualitative side. So they are eligible. And let's see, next slide, what some of the comments that we had were. Yeah, I think that some of us felt like there were a lot of activities. Some of them could have been a little more innovative. We really liked the idea of targeting dual credit to URM and low income students and trying to get those people to enroll. I think in general that we found that dual credit is a great way to get students not only engaged in the university, but really more academically up to speed. And a lot of times those populations don't take dual credit to the same extent as other students. So we really liked that strategy. I feel like the community colleges this year overall did a much better job talking about how they're using starfish and the various radius and a lot of the different tools that they have at their disposal. I think they need to continue to work on the faculty side of that and really getting faculty to buy into using these tools and to use them to target interventions better. But I do think that you know, integrating those early alerts into your overall advising strategies and really getting the faculty to play a big role and, you know, do their part of the heavy lift on this is important. And that's something I think all the community colleges have made progress on and can continue to work on. And I guess next is EU. And on the quantitative side, they were 6 out of 18. And on the qualitative side, they were 11 out of 18. So I think that they did fairly well overall on the qualitative side, but I do feel like the quantitative scores seem to have pulled their overall score down quite a bit. We really didn't have much detail on the recruitment events, and so that was a little bit difficult. There was a lot of repetition in this particular proposal, which was a little bit challenging. We felt like probably could have used the space that they had to respond a little more effectively to cover more areas instead of a lot of the repetition that there was there. Like some of the strategies I think were pretty narrow, but then the answers were not as narrow as the strategy. So their first strategy really was targeted for STEM plus H recruitment. But then, you know, the response talked about all kinds of different recruitment activities, not just STEM H. So, you know, just kind of thinking about that, the mismatch. I think that there could have been, again, some combining of strategies to maybe help with some of the repetition. So I think, I guess overall that was our review of our campuses.
Thank you. Is there any question or any other comment from anyone from that review team?
Actually, can I ask a general question? Melissa and others, okay, the packets I got, they were not in the same order as what we're presenting. And it was, to me, difficult to go from one strategy to the other. You know, when you had an opportunity, then an impact, and then a success, it was out of order. Did anybody else have that issue?
Yes,
Yeah, I felt that was really challenging.
Yeah.
Yes, that was, I'll go ahead and speak to that. We had, based on comments from the last review in the platform we use to collect the data through SurveyMonkey, and the issue that we had, I guess, from the institutions, and by inputting that data and trying to come up with a better tool. And this year it's one of those things, and I'll take that blame, if you will. It's one of those things where you don't know until you print it out that it doesn't print out in the order that you put it together. And so it's one of those things that we didn't know that was an issue until we printed it out. So I apologize for that being cumbersome for you all as a review team, knowing how much of a heavy lift it already is. But that wasn't anything on you, that was on us.
No apology really needed. It's just something we'll look at next year.
Absolutely. At this time, we'll move on to our next team, Team 4. The team lead there was Kathy Garrett. Kathy?
Hello, everyone. I was on a team with Nico Patty and Robert Croft, and they were fantastic to work with. They both provided great insight and perspective on these reports. So it was a pleasure to work with them. So we have Big Sandy, Moorhead, Jefferson, and Bluegrass. And looks like Big Sandy's first. One of the things with all of these reports is we really saw an effort to incorporate diversity and cultural sensitivity in their efforts and in recruiting and supporting students. Several of the reports you'll see from the scores were able to more effectively implement and produce effectiveness in that. And I think we see that with Big Sandy because they had a lot more strategies than some of the others. They had 15. And while they seem to be on target, I think with a large number of strategies, it's difficult sometimes to focus and give attention to each one. And so maybe some additional evaluation, maybe some combination of strategies should be evaluated to see if it would streamline their efforts. As you can see in their scores, the success strategies seem to fall short of the opportunity and impact strategies. While the strategies seemed good, they needed additional efforts in planning and analysis. An example of that is they incorporated a diversity module in their first year experience course. And while several of them did this, and it's a good strategy, didn't seem to be the planning on the front end of how to implement that, if there's any consistency, is there a Blackboard shell for that? It was just, we're going to do this. I really like to see them move forward because that was especially in their success strategies, something we saw more. Just needed more decided planning and more evaluation of effectiveness. We'd like to make sure they're gathering the data to really look at the analysis of whether the strategy or the goals are successful or maybe they need modifications. They had good ideas on their strategy, and while some of the, because it's all ones, not every strategy was a one, but overall, that's what it came to. And the underlying issue with Moorhead was a lack of strategic planning. One of the comments we repeatedly heard with this is, well, the funding wasn't there after we started, or we didn't have the staff we needed to fully implement or complete, or several things that they did with creating bias reporting and implementing several strategies after the fact. And while we appreciated they reported this in their lessons learned, they did not include all the parties at the table. On the bias reporting, they reflected in lessons learned that faculty inclusion would have been helpful and created some problems for them. So I think while I think they got a good start on some of them, they really need to focus on one, data reporting. We did not see a lot of data to support effectiveness of their strategies, and also just maybe coming back to the table and making sure that everyone is included that needs to have a voice in this strategy, whether it's students or faculty or staff. But they did get a good start, and they've had some good success with different strategies. Jefferson overall did very well. I would really want to give a shout out for their community engagement. They are really working in their community to reach their African American students. They're being very collaborative in that on campus as well as in the community. They're reporting good retention and supports for students. One of the strategies that we thought was particularly effective, they received a grant which started in their English department for culturally responsive and culturally mediated methods of instruction. And they've gone about incorporating that into other departments. What they didn't tell us, whether is this concrete PD, is this required, just that it was successful. So we would like to see more effective data, I guess, in the future of how did you implement this? What results came of this other than just that they thought it was a success. But overall, they did a very nice job. They showed good progress, good retention, good student supports, and reported feelings of inclusion for their URM students. And Bluegrass, again, Bluegrass did a very nice job in all areas. They were very thorough in their implementation. They showed an effort for implementing and including staff, including faculty, including students, their efforts at recruiting, whether that was the fairs on campus, or they really showed success in building relationships with their area high schools. And then tracking those students and trying to increase their communications with them. They were also able to provide data, actual reports on retention, on enrollments. They saw good enrollment data from their efforts. Also good reflection. So overall, Bluegrass did a really nice job.
Is that your last one, Kathy?
I think so.
Any questions from this team?
No questions. This is Robert. The only thing I'd like to add, I mean, Kathy did a job, and we really appreciated all the work she did to kind of put this all together for us. But the other comment I'd like to add is that I think what we really liked about Bluegrass and Jefferson was that when things didn't work, they tweaked it and they acknowledged it. And I think that is really what comes from really being on top of your strategies, really looking at them critically. And so I know that's been a theme amongst several of the other groups. And I really think that Bluegrass and Jefferson did a really good job of that.
Thank you, Robert. That is an important point because, and that is a difference in some of the reports that we reviewed is a quick response. And if a staff person wasn't available, they were flexible and made it happen.
That just to me is another reflection of other comments, as you said, Robert, just that a negative answer or a no, it didn't work is not a bad answer for us in all cases.
Absolutely.
Thank you. We'll move to Team 5.
Team 5, that's me. Team 5, hi, Bruce Brooks. My team was Ray Smith and Alfonso de Torres Nunez. And sitting and listening to everybody talk about their experience, I would say that we were shorted a little bit by the COVID because I don't think we got to bond nearly as much as everybody else did. And for that, I'm jealous. However, I will say, as somebody that did this last year, there certainly is a huge improvement. I think there's a huge improvement in the understanding of exactly what's being asked and the capacity to respond and how it's all written. That's just across the board. I will third or fourth the comments earlier about the confusion in the way the paperwork was sent to us, but ultimately it was all there. And I do think that whatever has been done in this last year to better detail this process to the schools has paid off because this is a much easier process to go through. That being said, across the board, still see a disconnect in the analysis and the next steps. I think that's pretty much true for most of the schools that we looked at. We looked at Owensboro Community College, Southeast Community College, Hopkinsville Community College, and Western Kentucky University. And a lot of times you get along, you get great activities. Hopefully, fingers crossed, you get good data. But then for some reason you get to the lessons learned and you're like, that's a perfectly valid step, but not real certain that you've outlined exactly how you came to that as the next thing you should do. That seems to be a weakness across the board. If you'll take the next slide, I'll go ahead and work us through our 4 schools. Thank you. Owensboro Community College, their quantitative scores were 11 out of 16 in the qualitative scores. They got 18 out of 18 with their total being 29 out of 34. Owensboro had, for us, the most strategies. There's some things that run true of all the schools that we looked at. Most of them have streamlined their strategies and focused more narrowly. With OCTC, excuse me, they have held on to all of their strategies. In many places, that's worked for them. I do think, and this is maybe as much for the CEO as it is the respondents to this survey, but I still think there is an issue with once the CEO approves a strategy, then the school is locked down to reporting it. And sometimes these strategies are not written to be able to be successful. When you say increase, improve, decrease, any of those elements, then you're sort of locked into a number. If you're going to increase, then we need to know what it was and what it goes to. And that's true here, particularly for OCTC. In their opportunity section, their first one says, focus on offering academic and personal supports for students with disabilities. That is a state of being, and it is hard to determine whether they have done it more or better. There's not much of an increase to say that they have focused. I get at this point it's been approved, but just so you know, that ends up causing schools challenges because reporting on that, analyzing that, and next steps from that are challenging across the board. So I'll move on through because overall OCTC did quite well from our perspective. As you see, qualitatively, they all met the threshold of a 2 collectively. There was a little bit of an issue about the scope of that first one that says focus to successfully support. That's a very broad goal of that first one. If they were to divide those into academic supports and personal supports, it might be easier. There was also a bit of a challenge just when we get into success with that number 1 strategy, because it talks about reducing the number of underrepresented minorities students who experience financial aid suspension, which is a great effort, great strategy. But they reported on other things, on other supports that didn't have at least an express correlation to reducing this number, nor do we know what the number was to begin with. So getting to a reduction is a bit of a challenge. Overall, still, their numbers came out solid. And across the 3 of us, they ended up with a collective 2. And then just as a note, I don't know if they're listening or not or following along on YouTube, but in the report, they note that they have realized their highest freshman retention in 9 years and their highest URM retention in 5 years, which doesn't seem to be related to be illustrated in their quantitative scores, but we read it in their report and we wanted to take a minute to congratulate them because that's a really big step to be able to say that they are seeing freshman retention the highest in 9 years and URM retention the highest in 5 years. So we wanted to take a moment to congratulate them on that. The number 7, and you'll see this in some of the notes that were pulled out, when they got to number 7 in their, I believe that was in their next step goals, the way that they had it written, they were going to review and revise an intake process, and in the process determined that their intake process was no longer valid and moved on to something else. We think that's, we read that as smart because they looked at the ground, they said, this isn't really the problem, we're moving on, but we're still stuck with a rubric that requires us to grade them on their progress with that. It's a bit of a deficit within the process, I think. Across the board, a 2 in all of our areas for Owensboro. Move to the next one, to the next slide, please. Southeast, great. Southeast sees a quantitative score of 11 out of 16 and 18 out of 18 in the qualitative scores. Southeast was another one that we had. Let me pull them up so that I can speak directly to them. This is another one where they were fairly focused. Actually, they had pulled in their number of strategies or reduced their number of strategies, it seems, and they were fairly focused. One of the things that we see in several of our schools is the use of a partner as as part of their plan, as one of their strategies, is the use of a partner. When it comes to next steps, when it comes to lessons learned, we would love to see how the campus plans to use that, and to see more concrete data as well. So the team felt that there was little concrete to base the analysis on. In number 2 of their analysis section within success, I believe, or impact, impact. Scroll my computer up. Number 2, promote the equity and inclusion and monitor the campus and community environment. Felt like they sort of failed to give us anything where they said that they were promoting inclusion or monitoring the campus. So I'm not in the community environment. So I'm not really sure where they were going with that. Need more detail and more connection back to the actual strategy as it was written. Number 3, it's clear that culture is infused in some of the curriculum, but again, the strategy is written on faculty training and there's no real callback to the faculty training. Ultimately, this school still got 2s across the board from us and felt like they had done a fairly decent job. The partnerships that already serve the URM, they talk about them, they highlight them, but they don't talk about how they're going to make it bigger, how they're going to integrate it, or how they're going to make it applicable for a broader audience. We think that would help them a lot in their next reporting cycle. Next slide. Hopkinsville Community College, quantitative score of 7 out of 16 and a qualitative score from us of a 12 out of 18. This was a challenging one for us because they really focused, and I applaud their effort to get down to really being able to laser in on an effort. However, it really hurt them in this because what they set out to do, what they focused on, that is not at all what they talked about, both for the most part across the report, but in most cases in the analysis and the next steps. They really didn't talk about the strategy that they were supposed to be serving. And the strategies that they submitted were really broad, but then the work that they were doing or they were reporting on was really narrow. Let's see if I can pull that back up too. Yeah. Excuse me, Word decides to crash. My apologies. There we go. So with Hopkinsville, and honestly, one of our judges really was way low compared to everybody else. But that's okay because I actually believe that their comments were very valid. Here is where, especially in Hopkinsville, where we get an example of using your partnerships as the response to the strategy, really leaves you in the wind to what those partners do. And it is hard to claim ownership. So HCC really leaned heavily in their opportunity section. They have one strategy: to persuade URMs and their families that HCC represents the most beneficial first choice for achieving their educational and vocational goals. That is a really broad statement, a strategy statement that's basically equivalent to schools, that you get the most, that you're the most beneficial for getting your education and vocational goals. Could and would are challenging statements because especially when we get to next steps, it doesn't talk about what you will do. It talks about what you might do. They didn't give us any definitive statements on what they will do. They also leaned heavily on a relationship with the Rotary in their community, which really, it seems like a great thing, but they don't show any control over the Rotary scholarships that they talk about. They do seem like great opportunities for the students, but I'm not sure that they've articulated how the school was engaged with that, how they will support that or further that in any way, shape, or form. And we felt like in this situation, they're decision makers outside of the recruitment process. We see no indication of expansion, growth, replication. There's really no detail of what's next on the horizon for them. It needs to be more, if you're going to focus this narrowly, I think everybody on the team felt like, then you really need to articulate your efforts, your analysis, and your next steps, because it didn't leave us anywhere else to go with them. Next slide. Western Kentucky University, quantitative scores I believe it was a 10. It's hidden from in my thing. And qualitative scores of 17 out of 18. Now here's an example where we think focus really did work for them. Western Kentucky University really focused its efforts on just a few strategies, and they articulated them well. Actively pursuing underrepresented minorities, high school juniors and seniors by cultivating relationships with families. And here's where they talked about new staff people, number of engagement activities that they did. Felt like this had a good, solid effort, and that they articulated the effort well. They also, Western really spent some time articulating the challenges they face both with staff and budget, and we recognize this, especially with the timing of that their staff came in relationship with the activities that they're reporting. But we would have liked to have seen some more information. They did talk about the 52 events that their new staff person went to, but there was no follow-up. Did they get contact information? Did they do more outreach? Because what you wrote as your strategy was to cultivating relationships and families, we see the initial contact would like to have seen some documentation in some way, shape, or form of how those relationships were growing, enhancing, expanding. Affinity groups currently are targeted and supporting current students. But there's a lack of data about the mentoring and recruiting efforts within that strategy. Their success strategies were focused primarily on institutional participation with the federal TRIO and Student Success Services program. I think we saw this in 3 out of the 4 schools that we worked with. Here in Owensboro, much better connection to how the campus works and how you're going to integrate those efforts. In one of our schools, they used TRIO as an example, and then went on to say that over half of their URM wouldn't even be eligible, but then gave us no way to connect those lessons learned and those resources they were identifying as being effective back to those students. That's not the reality for Western. In Western, actually, they were able to show some connection. This tends to be a better way to use those partnerships. Really show us how you're using them, either their data or their impact, how you're going to replicate and expand on that. We felt like Western did that. Here's another one of those places where really an opportunity to focus on languages other than English is really evident. They talk about their Intercultural Student Engagement Center. They talk about a lot of the places where they are engaging students in how they live and how to help change that environment for students by increasing the diversity, by increasing resources, or in some places by connecting students who have some common connection. And here would be a great place to engage with languages other than English. They focused their impact strategies on the introduction of formal processes, on formal mechanisms within the campus environment to infuse cultural competency. They weren't successful in all of them. They didn't formalize all of them, but we certainly see some effort towards that. And I think that their numbers back them up, that they're seeing some successes there. Across the board, we felt like this was a pretty strong report, and they got a 2 across the board as well.
Thank you,
yes.
Bruce. Are there any questions or any comments that the review team wants to add?
Come on, Dr. Munoz.
Not at the minute.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much. We'll move on to Team 6. Dr. Fagan.
Thank you, Dr. Offit. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Myself, Miss Kim Hallbauer and Miss Missy Ross made up Team 6. We reviewed Murray State University, Gateway, University of Kentucky, and Elizabethtown. We'll go ahead and skip to the next slide, and we'll discuss each institution. As we can see, the quantitative scores for Murray State were 5 out of 18, the qualitative 6 out of 18. The team felt that overall supportive evidence was missing from the discussion of strategies for this institution. We needed a more robust narrative with some concrete evidence to strengthen the strategies that were being discussed. We would have liked to have seen more supportive raw data, some numbers, some percentages, to support the strategies being implemented and analyzed. In addition, we would have liked to have seen a more robust discussion with information about the lessons learned and next steps. While the shell was there for what is being done at this institution, the discussion was a bit vague, and it was difficult to make the connections needed to understand how these strategies were being implemented with Fidelity, how they were being analyzed, and the lessons learned and next steps. The team and I have taken extensive notes and have some pretty extensive feedback that can be shared outside of what's listed on this slide for all of the institutions, if there are anyone that wants to discuss some more of that feedback. We're ready for the next institution. We reviewed Gateway next, as we can see that a 15 out of 16 in quantitative scores and a 9 out of 18 in qualitative scores. We felt that out of all the institutions that we had reviewed, our community colleges had a pretty strong discussion of strategies. With Gateway, we would have liked to have seen some additional quantitative data to support some of the discussion that was happening with these strategies. There was good discussion, but there needed to be some expansion to support and demonstrate that the strategies were being implemented with fidelity and that analysis was occurring. In some of the strategies, the lessons learned were discussed, and others, not at all. So there were some essential pieces that we were missing in order to fully understand what was happening with the strategies at this institution. Ready for the next? The University of Kentucky had a 13 out of 18 with quantitative scores and an 8 out of 18 with qualitative scores. The team felt that some of the strategies discussed from this institution were discussed in generalities, that it was also missing some of that concrete data, those metrics for us to understand what was happening, particularly with the analysis. Some lessons learned were outlined for the institution, but the next steps were sometimes unclear. For example, there was a good deal of discussion spent on the need to work towards balancing First Amendment rights with the needs of marginalized students, staff, and faculty. But there weren't any clear steps on how that was going to be done in the future. So overall, some great things being discussed, but some additional information for us as the reviewers to understand how we're getting from that strategy being implemented, analyzed, and the next steps. Next slide, please. Our final institution was Elizabethtown. They received a 9 out of 16 for quantitative scores and an 11 out of 18 with qualitative scores. This review team felt that out of the institutions we reviewed, Elizabethtown had a very strong discussion of all of their strategies. If anything, we would have liked to have seen some additional detail to provide evidence of implementation and analysis for a few of the strategies, including some more concrete data to clarify the correlations and causations discussed in the analysis. There seemed to be a little bit of disconnect. A bold statement would be made about causation or correlation, and there wasn't any raw or hard data to support those statements. The lessons learned and next steps were an honest reflection, which was very refreshing. In this institution, we saw that there were some lessons learned that they felt could have been done differently, and they clearly outlined some next steps that they would do in reflection of those hard lessons learned. And we enjoyed seeing that. Our primary concern too was to be careful that attendance at cultural competency events does not automatically equate to an increase in cultural competency. There seemed to be several statements and several different strategies that automatically, we had a lot of people attend, that automatically means that we have an increase in cultural competency. That's quite a leap to make without any kind of hard or raw data to support those kind of statements. But overall, we felt the institution did a good job.
Thank you, Dr. Fagan. Any comments from the team or any other questions that anyone might have?
I do like the thought that attendance doesn't equate to competency unless we can imply osmosis.
Yes, we also had another institution that had proclaimed that because they had a diverse faculty, that it automatically equated to them being happier. And I thought that again was also a bold statement. Just because you have a diverse faculty doesn't automatically mean that everybody's happy with what's happening with diversity at that institution. They're two different statements that were kind of being correlated. So I would caution all of our institutions to be careful of those kinds of bold statements. And if they're going to make them, to have some raw data to kind of support how that's happening at their institution.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Okay, well,
Okay.
Dawn, thank you for leading this group. I think that's the end of it. And I just was going to say that the next steps, actually, I'm seeing we have, correct me if I'm missing one or two, but we have 4 of the 4-year institutions that need work. Eastern, Moorhead, Murray, and UK, they were below our score line. And then Hopkinsville, E-Town, and I just forgot to write down the last one that we had. Who am I missing?
I think it's just Hopkinsville and Elizabethtown.
Hopkintown, E-Town, and
I think it's just those 2.
okay. So they are eligible to resubmit or to modify. You tell the plans.
Okay, so I wanted to just go over the what next. Well, before I get into that, I do want to take the opportunity to again thank the review teams and especially the review team leads for taking on this task. I know that it is an onerous task. It has a lot of moving pieces and parts, but you can see the importance of this particular work. So again, I thank you all for your time in reviewing and putting together the feedback for the institutions because they find it particularly valuable. I would be remiss if I did not take the opportunity to say that this is the second iteration of the review team process in terms of the submissions of reports. We had our first one last year, and this is our second one. And it is very important to note that the institutions, Kentucky State University, Western Kentucky University, and Maysville, who did not make their scores last year, all of them made their scores this year. And so they took the feedback to heart, and you can see that it was evident in the scores they received this year. So kudos to them. And so what happens now for those institutions, those 6 that you just mentioned, who scored below the minimum required score, the applicable threshold for automatic eligibility for new programs, they can, at this point, request to revise their submission. So what they need to do is email me and say that they intend to revise their report and they would like to resubmit. And I need that email of intent by Friday, May 1st. And once they email me that intent, then they will get further instructions as to what it specifically the process is for revision. And that revision will be due back to me again on June 1st. And so at that time, we will reconvene the review teams for just an overview to see if, based on the feedback that was provided by the review teams and the resubmissions, we will be able to, if the review team leads reports that the teams decided to accept their revisions and increase their scores. And so the final report will be delivered to the CEO on June 22nd, which is the next CEO meeting. And so that will include a list of all of the institutions, including those who had the opportunity to revise, so that there will be a final report given, as this one right now is the preliminary one, because there is a review process. So those are the next steps for institutions that we have. And
John,
in that particular time period, I would just like to say that if an institution would like to connect with the review team lead to have further conversation about the feedback, if they have any questions about what was submitted on the reports, we can certainly make that happen as well. Dr. Stan?
Don, am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay. I assume that you will give the emails tomorrow to the chief diversity officers with comments, because Friday is a very quick turnaround. Or
they have their reports already. All of the institutions have been given their reports.
okay.
So they have this, they've been given the reports with the written feedback. And so based on the written feedback, based on their scores from this particular presentation, they can just, all they have to do is email me and say, you know what, we want to resubmit. That's all I need by Friday.
Okay.
And then they have until June 1st for the resubmission. That would include those answers that they did not score a maximum of a 2 that they can resubmit.
Very good. Very good. Anything else, Don?
Dawn?
Yes.
This is Lisa. One quick question, just to make sure I understand. Are you saying that the schools, the institution may contact you if they got anything below a 2 to redo their scores, or must they? Is that a may, or they will do that?
So there's 2 parts. The first part is for those institutions that made below the minimum required score. So those 4-year institutions that made below a 24, and those KCTCS institutions that made below a 22, those institutions only can submit an email to me by Friday saying we intend to resubmit or revise our submissions. And they need to do that by Friday. When they send me that email, then they will get an outline response stating how they would go about revising. And so those institutions that get the opportunity to revise, again, those that did not meet the minimum score, will be able to rewrite, if you will, those responses, those narratives for those, only for the places where they received below a 2, for those scores of a 1 or a 0. If they received a 2, they don't need to resubmit.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for leading that, Dawn. Now, as we come towards the end of the meeting, is there any other business that needs to be addressed today? Anyone? If there is no other business, the next CEO meeting is scheduled for Monday, June 22nd at 1 p.m. till, this says 4 p.m., but we're actually getting out at 3 p.m. today. So job well done in all accounts.
I would like to make one announcement, Dr. Stack, before you adjourn, and that is the next presentation in the Higher Equity webinar series is coming up this Thursday, and it is Inclusive Instructional Practices During COVID-19. And it features Dr. Shauna Morgan from the University of Kentucky and Dr. Derek Greenfield from Kentucky State University. And you see a registration link at the bottom of this particular page. But if you also go on the homepage of CPE's website, cpe.ky.gov, then the registration information is there. And once you register, you'll receive the link to be able to participate. So we hope you all join us for the next iteration.
Don, could you just send that out to the committee as an email, or the notification as an email? It makes it easy.
I absolutely will do that.
Thank you. Any other comments? Well, there's always one motion in order. Does anyone want to motion for adjournment?
So move.
Second.
All in favor, please punch the leave button. Thank you.
Aye.
Thank you. Aye.
Aye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for a good meeting. Thank you, Don.